Hello. All right. Welcome to our lunch break study. It is August 4th, 2021. I was looking last night to decide on the topic. At some point, I'll figure out how to do topics in advance effectively. I posted this morning on Facebook, but we'll have to figure out the best way to get it to you first thing on Wednesday mornings, even though you should come irrespective of what the topic is. Just a headline for the next 4 weeks, the month of Elul begins this upcoming weekend. This upcoming Monday. And so we're going to go into our Elul program, and every Wednesday I will be teaching on Rabbi Lou, Rabbi Alan Lou of blessed memory. He wrote perhaps one of the most read books written by a rabbi in this century, and it concerns the high holiday period. This is real and you're completely unprepared. And one of the things I have found since I joined Congregation Beth Sholom 3 years ago is that I have heard from all of you, not all of you, but pretty much most of you, about Rabbi Lou and about his teachings and about how meaningful he was. And so I've learned almost Rabbi Lou, and I never had the privilege of meeting him. I've learned about him almost entirely through you. So I thought it might be fun if I gave you my perspective on someone who did not know Rabbi Lou on his teaching. And so we're going to be taking the month of Elul to learn from sermons and from writings that Rabbi Lou shared with us, and hopefully gain a lot of meaning as we prepare for the high holidays. Okay, so I was looking and I noticed that there's new studies. It's in the news now. The military is reporting that there are UFOs. I mean, I wasn't sure which article I wanted to link to it. You know, I was going to post an article on Facebook, and I thought, what news source is benign? It's like no news source I can choose that would be benign. So here's a news source here. This is the Washington Post. UFOs exist and might come from beyond Earth. The US said, will that encourage conspiracy theorists? Here's what my research found. And so there is a number of articles considering the US government has released information about these flying objects. I don't know what to make of them. So you can take that for whatever you will. That doesn't interest me as much as the theology does, of course. And this is a classic question. It's not the first time this question has arisen. In fact, the 20th century, the question arose, as we'll learn in a bit, prior to the 20th century, in fact. But so what we're going to do today is study a piece of text on, well, if we were to find out that there were extraterrestrials living amongst us or on other planets, would that impact our theology? Would that change the way we look at God? Would that change the way we look at Judaism? And there's a wonderful text on this, which I'm going to study with all of you today, which was written by Rabbi Norman Lamb of blessed memory. Rabbi Lamb was the president and the head of Yeshiva University. He was the founder and first editor of Tradition. And this was a piece that he wrote. Oh, I should have the year for you. Oh, I don't know do I have the year when he wrote this? Excuse me. I'm not sure I have the year when this was written, but if I had to guess, I would probably say in the late 60s, early 70s. It is in his book, Faith and Doubt. The entire piece is in his book, Faith and Doubt, and it's a 50-page article. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put it in the chat, and the chat version will have my highlights in it. But what I'm going to attempt to do is just take us through the religious implications of extraterrestrial life and begin to ask questions. So before I enter into it, let me tell you a little bit about Rabbi Lamb. I told you he was the president of Yeshiva University, founder of Tradition, Orthodox rabbi par excellence in the 20th century. What do you think he's going to say? What's he going to say? Anybody? Just based upon our study to date in terms of our theologians, what do you think Rabbi Lamb and the Orthodox movement might have to say? Who wants to just give a guess? Do we have any assumptions?
I'll give a guess.
Thank you, Ellen. Thanks for playing along.
I think he's going to say, why not? And all of whatever we discover are God's creations, that God is so magnificent and mysterious. Why couldn't it be true?
Okay, so do you think it undercuts Jewish thought? How about the giving of the 10 commandments to the chosen people? What about that part? Is that going to be an issue?
No, I don't think so.
You don't think so? Other thoughts? Other thoughts? Let me tell you, actually, I'll begin with my reservation. So I've always been skeptical of talk of extraterrestrials. Because my concern has historically been it makes human beings feel less significant, less important than they are. It makes us feel small. Whether or not there are actually extraterrestrials living on other planets, something which we've never proven, or at least have no real evidence of, the framework which gets us to think that we are one of billions and billions, and we're just a speck. It just makes you feel small as a human being. And Judaism revolves around two things, as Reb Simcha Bunim taught us. We keep on one pocket, the world was created for me, and the other pocket is I am nothing but dust and ashes. And this myth of extraterrestrial life inhabiting the universe, if you've ever read Carl Sagan's book Contact, for there not to be life on other planets, Carl Sagan says it would be an awful waste of space. Well, that makes us feel rather small. So my concern is on the myth, the framework level of how we view ourselves in the universe. When we see these large aliens coming upon us, we can tend to feel very small and insignificant. And my theory is that that's part of the point. That is part of the mythic point that those propagating those ideas are trying to get us to feel small. So that's my thinking, and I'm going to frame it with where I'm coming from. Judah and then Ellen, and then we're going to go into the text.
I just want to point out that the U in the UFO is unidentified. And that is what the government report didn't say, we've got spacecraft, we've identified spacecraft. They said, there's this number, I don't know, 100, 400 things that we don't know what they are. They're there, but they're not.
Yeah, that's almost more terrifying, Judah. I mean, I find that even more scary is that there are 400 ships on planet Earth that we don't know how they work. That's terrifying in and of itself. Ellen.
Well, who's to say that these extraterrestrials are not humans?
Okay, so who's to say that that's right. Perhaps we could go far afield with how this could be the case. But it's fantastical and it's fun. So let's take a look at Rabbi Lamb and let's see how he analyzes this from a Jewish perspective. The meat, the fun part of this is going to be in the second half. So I'm going to move quickly, which is going to mean if you have to stop and interrupt me, just stop and interrupt me, put up your hand or just shout out something, because I'm going to try to move us to where I think the heart of this, which is going to be in the second half of this piece, when he digs down into the theology. Okay, so the religious implications of extraterrestrial life, basically the conversation we just had, which is the existence of rational sentient beings on a planet other than Earth is no longer a fantastic remote possibility conjectured by imaginative and unrealistic minds. This is 50 years ago. Nothing's different today. In fact, perhaps more so now. And so it's not outlandish for us to conceive of there being extraterrestrial life. Okay, so that's how he begins with, and then you have to understand he's going to use the science from 50 years ago. And he says that basically, quoting Vannevar Bush, one of the world's most distinguished men of science, basically this new sense of man's inconsequentiality. All right, so basically, one of the most persistent advocates of the radical new philosophy is the famous Harvard astronomer Harlow Shapley, who in 1918 located the center of our galaxy some 50,000 light years away. Basically, as pointed out by me, this kind of can make us feel small. And so therefore, this challenge must be met forthrightly and honestly. And apparently there has not yet been any serious Jewish thinking on the subject. All right, so that's a little bit of a preface. Okay, so the scientific background. All right, so that the universe contains an enormous number of heavenly bodies was known already during the Bible, right? So we say that the expression for a large number is like the sand on the seashore or like the stars in the heavens. The vastness of astronomical distances, although not measured in terms of light years, was also known before modern times. Thus, Maimonides estimates the distance from the center of the Earth to Saturn as 125 million miles. Nevertheless, the universe was considered closed, limited, and well-defined, with the Earth at the dead center. In the 16th and 17th centuries, with the Renaissance and Copernicus and Galileo, and then with Sir Isaac Newton, the sun, not the Earth, became the center of the world.
You know how close Maimonides was to the reality?
Pretty darn close, right? And then in 1980,
I'm curious.
well, you'll see. Well, he's going to go
125 million miles.
Oh, how far that is? Oh, I doubt that. I have no idea. Anybody astronomer here who could tell us if that's right or wrong? I think it's 91 million to the moon, right? Or 91,000. You know what? I don't do numbers. I just do theologies. Okay, so 1918, astronomer, they got some telescopes. Now we know the Milky Way is over there are 100 billion stars, and they're estimating there are all these stars. The question is, how many of these stars contain planets? Okay, so I think this is all just interesting scientific background. All right, so this is, obviously this is advanced in the last 50 years, but this part hasn't. Despite the absence of immediately available evidence for such planets and for extraterrestrial life, most astronomers assume their existence in proportions that sound nothing less than fantastic. Have you ever spoken to an astronomer? 829 million. So he was only off by a factor of 3.5, it looks like. Ever met an astronomer? They all think that aliens are real, right? Most astronomers will say, if you crunch the numbers, if you use Bayesian probabilistic theory, it's more likely than not, even without evidence, that there will be life forming elsewhere. And Lamb is acknowledging that seems to be, if you talk to any scientific, that seems to be, most astronomers assume their existence, right? That seems to be the conventional wisdom. Okay, so what is the assumptions about extraterrestrials? He goes through a few, and I'm going to zip through these rather quickly, but why are there all of the above theorizing about extraterrestrial life is based on one assumption, that there's evolution, that there's a natural evolution of life from inert chemicals that results in life. And so if you assume that evolution is a part of reality, then you can assume that that evolution will have taken place elsewhere. And then, of course, so I'm skipping by that, historical antecedents, current speculation on extraterrestrial intelligent life is not new. Both the astronomical ideas necessary for such life and the conjecture itself about rational and sentient beings elsewhere were known in antiquity, 2,500 years ago. Anaximander proposed the idea of an infinite number of words. 200 years later, the Greek Democritus, inventor of the theory of atoms, elaborated on the same idea. Aristotle also ventured into talking about the conception of the universe. In the 16th and 17th centuries, there was more thought of this. All right. So, however, never before has this speculation so gripped the entire scientific community and indeed all of mankind. I don't know if anybody was gripped by the recent revealing. So I'm not sure, but it's fun to think that we've been gripped. I think we might have been gripped 50 years ago when The Day After Tomorrow and The Twilight Zone was broadcasting. Whether or not we're still gripped by that is interesting.
When ET
is
came
debatable. Out. Oh, ET came out. Very good. 40 years ago when ET came out. Very good. We certainly were gripped by that. And of course, and what of man? So what are the consequences of human beings, the consequences of the possibility, according to so many scientists, probability of extraterrestrial intelligent life are pressed upon us by most of those who have written about the subject, right? So people are writing about the subject. They believe that Modern thought from scientism to existentialism has banished teleology and reduced man to a purposeless and insignificant blob of protoplasm. All right, so that was kind of my point from earlier. We're just following the nature. There's no real purpose. He says Jacques Barzoon has traced to Francis Bacon the root idea which colors all modern thought and feeling, both scientific and unscientific, which is the idea of the irrelevance of man. That's really my concern entering into this. And he pretty much says that if you take a look at modern thought from science to existentialism, we've reduced mankind into an insignificant blob of protoplasm. And that's not outlandish, I don't think. All right, so he goes on, it's earlier than they think. He then points out that more than once in the past have the wisest men of a generation been caught up in ardor and passion for certain ideas, which seemed most plausible and which later turned out to be a mistake. That's no shocker to anybody here. And so he just goes through very quickly saying that it's an inherent hazard of the subject. It becomes difficult to distinguish science from science fiction. Certainly in 2021, it's outrageously challenging to distinguish science from science fiction. Back to Dr. Bush, who wrote in Fortune that scientists can establish a complete set of facts and relations about the universe, all neatly proved. And then on this firm basis, men can securely establish their personal philosophy, their personal religion, free from doubt and error. Let me repeat that. Basically, he says, scientists establish a complete set of facts and relations about the universe, all neatly proved. And that on this firm basis, we can then figure out who we are, free from any doubt or error. He then cautions against the exuberance that accompanies achievements of science, but that makes rash people come to conclusions which they believe to be inevitable and logical results. So we can upload our thoughts into the cloud, so we can upload our humanity into the cloud. So there's a leap that can take place. So we need a little bit of humility. Finally, he gives us the biological premise, which I didn't highlight anything in, so I didn't find it that interesting. So we're going to scroll right through that. All right, so the veil over Genesis. Now, the above views have been presented not because of any feeling that a hoax is being played on the public or that the scientific community is in the grips of a great delusion. Rather, they're mentioned in order to show that contrary to the impression conveyed to the layperson, there is no certainty or definiteness in the ideas being proposed by scientists concerning extraterrestrial life. It's a guess, it's an educated guess, but it's not yet a fact. And that's still the case. Nevertheless, these exceptions have been noted. The fact remains that most of the highly respected scientists of our day, eminent in their fields, do believe that intelligent life exists elsewhere in the universe. And some of them believe that life is close enough for us to communicate. The credentials of these scientists are impeccable, and the weight of evidence sufficiently convincing for us to take their conjectures seriously, despite any reservations we may have. Okay, so I pause here for 1 second. If I asked you, who here think, if you had to bet a quarter, is there life on other planets anywhere in the entire universe? I bet, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I bet you I'd have 225. Okay, all of you will say yes. If you had to bet a quarter, you guys are probably betting that there's life on other planets. Anybody want to challenge me on that? I don't think so. And I think that's basically proves Rabbi Lamb's point in the first half of his article. We all already believe it. The scientist has so thoroughly gone into our heads that we're more likely to believe that there is life on other planets based upon the scientific framework that has been established for us. Okay, what does that mean? Rabbi Lamb wants us to ask. So no religious position is loyally served by refusing to consider annoying theories that may well turn out to be facts. Let me highlight that because I'm glad Ellen is laughing. That could be, I think, the tagline for this Wednesday lunch, right? No religious position is loyally served by refusing to consider annoying theories. Well, that's what I like to do. I like to consider annoying theories that may turn out to be facts, even if they're annoying in the consideration of them. We're not served religiously by ignoring them. That is a belief of mine. Torah is a Torah of truth, and to hide from the facts is distort that truth into a myth. Of course, it must be repeated that the theories here under discussion have not yet been established as true, but they might be. And Judaism will have to confront them, as it has confronted what men have considered the truth throughout the generations. We learn more about reality, human beings, through scientific method, gain greater knowledge about the world in which we live. And therefore, our theology, and our belief system is going to have to comport to that instead of just living in ignorance, which we're not going to do. So Maimonides, 8 centuries ago, was faced with the widely accepted Aristotelian theory of the eternity of the universe. This is a problem for Aristotle, because if the universe is eternal, then the story of creation doesn't make any sense, right? So how does Maimonides resolve his fidelity to Aristotelian thinking and his commitment to the Torah? So Maimonides demonstrated that Aristotle had not conclusively proved the eternity of matter, and that since eternity and creation were philosophically equally acceptable alternatives, he preferred to accept creation. All right, so even he sort of struggled with that idea. So it is this kind of position which honest men, particularly honest believers in God and Torah, must adopt at all times, and especially in our times. Basically, we have to accept it, and as he says here, reinterpret the verses in Genesis to accommodate the theory of the eternity of matter. He could have. All right. So conventional dogmas, even if endowed with the authority of Aristotle, must be tested vigorously. If they're found wanting, we shouldn't bother with them. But if they're found correct, then we can't overlook them. So this could be a waste of time, but that's okay, because at least we spent an hour with an annoying theory. We must then use newly discovered truths to better understand our Torah. So the integrity of Maimonides was in no way diminished by his readiness, if pursued, of the correctness of the theory of eternity to reinterpret Genesis. Okay, so basically what Lamb is trying to say is, look, he had to come up, how did he interpret Genesis? He needed to come up with we can say Aristotle didn't prove the eternity of matter, or we can try to synthesize the eternity of matter into our reading of the book of Genesis, basically was Maimonides. And so what Rabbi Lamb is suggesting is that this first part of Genesis has always been accepted in the Jewish tradition as containing hidden doctrines. The text was never meant to be taken as literal history. Wow, that's an Orthodox rabbi. I want to say that again. It sounds like Heschel. Heschel is the one who said as a report on Revelation, the entire Torah itself is Midrash. That's a wonderful thing we like to say. It's all interpretation based upon this experience of confronting with God. And here, Lamb is going to say, even for that first part, he's going to say that in the first part, we know it's midrashic, it's not literal. Judah.
Yeah, I mean, they tap dance around how many generations of man before the Torah, like what, 946 generations before he created Adam? I mean, what's that about?
Good. He's going to get to that. That's perfect. So thank you. We're going to get to that. What are we talking about here? So this is part of the Bible that Lamb says is known as Maaseh Bereshit. It's a myth. It's always been considered esoteric. It's got mysteries. And so you can't really leave when people come up to me, Rabbi, how was the world created in 7 days? How could it be created? You know, even Rabbi Lamb, the president of Yeshiva University, says it's a myth. It's esoteric. It's unknown. It's midrash. Don't read it literally. Rabbi Kook takes this position explicitly. The Torah, he writes, has certainly veiled the story of creation and spoken in parables. What is most important is the knowledge that emerges from all of this, that one must know God and live a truly moral life. All right. So the position by both Maimonides and Rav Kook is worthy of acceptance and emulation. It's the kind of attitude that religious Jews who wish to live and participate fully in the modern world can adopt with dignity. It includes both the acceptance of modern knowledge with a healthy skepticism of popularly acknowledged truth and an abiding faith in Torah. together with inward-directed skepticism, which does not allow us to seal the teachings of Torah with finality of our own making. Basically, what he's describing is humility. We need a little bit of humility about what we can know and what we are capable of knowing about the world. The grandeur of Judaism's insight has not yet been fully revealed. God is greater than our finite thoughts about God. All right, so that's the setup. That is the setup. That is where he's coming from. And what are the challenges then if we are not alone in this universe? Well, first of all, it is about the uniqueness of man. He writes man, but obviously he means human beings. The first and most immediate challenges is the concern of our uniqueness. Man was created according to the Torah in the image of God. So how does this godlike creature relate to other possibly superior creatures elsewhere in the cosmos? Man is deemed valuable by Judaism. Without the premise of man's inherent worthiness, all of religion is meaningless. I'll say that again. Without the premise of our inherent worth, all of religion is meaningless. God revealed God's self to us because we were deserving of such knowledge. But if man is not the only inhabitant of the universe and possibly an inferior one, are we intrinsically valuable? And are we significant enough to have God reveal God's self to us? Jewish thinkers have often spoken of human beings as the purpose of creation. The Midrash and the mystics, especially even into the 19th and 20th century, spoke of man as a microcosm and have granted him far-reaching spiritual powers to influence the destiny of the cosmos. But can this be true if we're just a blip on the radar? So he says the problem is not so much theological, but anthropological in the European sense of the study of human beings and our place in the world. Not our conceptions of God, but our conceptions of man. So what's interesting here, the framing for him of how he understands the issue. If we find that there are other creatures, other extraterrestrial beings in the world, it will challenge our conception of who we are. It won't question God. God can take care of people on the other side of the universe. It's fine. But who are we? And what does our tradition teach us about? I mean, are we just one of a million, or are we uniquely special? So basically, the challenge turns out to be a humanistic one, according to Rabbi Lamb. All right, so the early sources, despite the easy assumption that the Bible supports the idea of the primacy of man, that's not necessarily the case. In fact, people don't like that we refer to us as the chosen people, or, oh, you know, we're so special. And so the idea that the Bible supports the idea of the primacy of man, Rabbi Lamb is not certain about that. He says we find no sure judgments, only inclinations, and this can be used to support opposing theses, that of either man's centrality or that of his non-uniqueness, right? I began with Rabbi Simcha Bunim, who says, what is human beings? We've got one in one pocket, world was created for us, one in the other pocket, I'm nothing but a gelatinous blob, right? So we're in the middle of that. Where do we sit? How do we reconcile that if this has been made clear for us that we're not alone in the universe? So it is true that the doctrine of man's creation in the divine image bestows transcendent value upon man. I certainly hope it would. I certainly hope it does. I hope it means something, right? Being created in the divine image, seeing the face of God in another human being, the idea that human beings are unique and the ability to hear God's call and have certain inherent value. Those are principles that I've staked my life on, that Judaism stakes its existence on. So, but Lamb wants to say that that is not necessarily an exclusivist principle. It is quite possible that Homo sapiens on this planet and other equivalent races elsewhere represent the interpenetration of the natural and the supernatural. Whether the idea of the divine image is interpreted rationalistically as intelligence, or ethically as freedom of will, or mystically as possessing creative powers, there is nothing in it that insists upon man's singularity. So just because God spoke to us doesn't mean that we're alone from all of those whom God may have spoken with. If the image of the absolute one God can be impressed upon the manifold individuals within the human race, why couldn't it go to other races? And he quotes from Psalms, Psalm 8. Says it's the best illustration of the difficulty of finding a single view in the Torah in terms of our significance or our triviality. So here's from Psalm 8. When I behold thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast established, what is man that thou art mindful of him? And the Son of Man that thou thinkest of him? Yet that hast made him but little lower than the angels, and hast made him to have dominion over the works of thy hand. Thou hast put all things under his feet. So here Lamb writes, a consideration of celestial grandeur points to our insignificance, yet our essential worth is salvaged, and proof is adduced from his superiority over the other terrestrial creatures. So what we are given here is not a hesitation and uncertainty, but a marvelous paradox. I hope we're comfortable. Hope we're comfortable with that expression of marvelous paradox, because so much of what Rabbi Lamb is going to come down to is this marvelous paradox of Rabbi Bonham with the two pieces. How do we reconcile man is both important and insignificant, central and peripheral, worthy and trivial? In the context of the vast cosmos, human beings, man shrinks almost into nothingness, right? Certainly. In the framework of his own habitation, he is supreme, worthy, and terribly important. Both are true. You're important in your home and amongst your family, and you're terribly unimportant from the perspective of the stars. The young man who leaves his home and family for the first time to make his lonely way in the wide world experiences the same ambivalence about himself in terms of his home and family and of his vital importance. It is only when he can retain his inner dignity, even when apparently mocked by the indifference of the unfriendly world, that he achieves maturity. Mankind today, on the threshold of this voyage to the far outreaches of the cosmos, experiences the same paradox described by the psalmist. Don't we? Don't we? But this denotes an existential predicament. It's not a philosophical problem, right? It's basically, who are we? What are we doing here? What is the nature of existence? Do we matter? Do we not matter? And how can we hold both simultaneously? He goes on to say in the Midrash, there are a number of statements that favor a strong anthropocentrism, which means that God views human beings at the center of the universe. So God is reported as saying, all that I have created has been for your sake. This statement, however, reveals that the Midrash puts man's role central, but that doesn't necessarily make it metaphysically so. Right? In fact, the Talmud speaks of God roaming over 18,000 worlds. So we have this idea that there are more than one worlds. Questions. Is everyone following me down this slippery slope? Everyone making their way through this text here? Anybody good? And Ellen, you have a question? All right.
No.
So now we're going to come up with two schools of thought here that are a part of Judaism. Just like we're going to have to grapple with paradoxes in our own souls, we're going to have to grapple with the paradox that is inherent in the Jewish tradition and in our texts. And what we're going to have on two sides, we're going to have Sadia Gaon and Maimonides, who are going to disagree with each other on this place of human beings in the universe. The axle of the world, the most illustrious systematic exponent of anthropocentrism, the position, right, the idea that the world revolves around human beings, was the 10th century Reb Sadia Gaon. And for Sadia, man is nothing less than the goal of creation and the axle of the world and its foundation, right? Doesn't that sound great, right? Everything revolves around us people, right? That's what Sadia has to say. This anthropology is not a casual idea for Sadja. It is an integral part of his whole outlook. For all of his frailty, man is the condition of the world's existence. Without human beings, the creation of the heaven and earth would be an exercise in futility, and there would be no meaning in existence. That's our Reb Sadja. The centrality of man is meant, of course, in reference to the phenomenal world. In the larger ultimate sense, it is God, of course, who is the center and the goal of all. But in the created universe, man is the telos, the purpose of all else. All right, I like that. That sounds nice. We can like Reb Sadja. Indeed, the superiority of man indicated by his mastery over the rest of creation reaches, how do we know we're different? We have ethical free will. We have the capacity for free will, for free choice. And that makes us different from every other creature. This in turn makes us capable of being subject to the divine command. Because we have that free will, we can actually be subject to God. That's it. That's a beautiful thing that nobody else on this planet has. Although absolutely inferior to the creator, man is the crown of all creation. Much to the dismay of Ibn Ezra and Maimonides, Sadja maintains that the primacy of man holds sway over the entire range of the universe. Even the angels are conditioned by man. Sadja arrives at his conclusion of the superiority of man in the universe by his exposition of the centrality of the middle. Now he sounds like me. You guys have heard me talk about the middle, where the middle movement, we're stuck in between these two thoughts. Well, Sadja sees us as the middle of all existence, which is structurally or geometrically in the middle of what is. So he says, what's found in the middle of everything? What do you put in the middle? The thing which is most valuable. Just look at nature, right? The kernel lodges inside the fruit because it's more precious. The yolk of the egg, yolk is the heart of a human being. The stuff in the middle is the thing that matters most, Sadja has learned. Now, the universe, according to this model, is geocentric, and the earth was in the center and everything else revolved around it. So this middle point was the most precious and the axle of the world, right? You like that? Who likes Sadja? It's really good. It's good. It's a good way of looking at the world. It helps. I'll just say this. It's a wonderful corrective for the times in which we live. And for that reason alone, Sadja is worth studying, because the world wants us to feel small. And Sadja wants to remind us it's all about you. Judah.
It reminds me of the conversations I have or I don't have with people who think animals are more evolved than we are. And it's like, so I try to point out that, I'm not going to tell them that we're the pinnacle of creation, because they're not going to like that. But I always point out, like in the Talmud, it says, you got to treat your animal better than you. You got to feed your animal before you don't let two animals of different type, have the same yoke. But then again, if it's cold outside, you can take your animal's fur and wear it. So I mean, but I'm sure I don't know if you know, but
Tsar Balei Chaim, is a very important Jewish value, which is we do not want to increase suffering to any living creature. That doesn't make those living creatures on the same level as us, but it makes us terrible people. If we're the center of all creation, then our action revolves up, down, left, and right. And so if we're cruel down, then we should expect cruelty to come our way in the same direction. But that's me. That's my thought. All right, so let's go on. A drop in the bucket. Where Judaism is the kind of religion that attempted to adopt rigid dogma. Check this out. This is, again, Rabbi Lamb. Were Judaism the kind of religion that tended to adopt rigid dogma and official ideologies, the approach outlined above, espoused by Sadja and so many leading thinkers, would no doubt have been enshrined as sacred dogma. And we would be hard put in the second half of the 20th century to defend it in the face of the signs of man's non-singularity in the universe. Fortunately, however, Judaism seeks clearly defined limits and a high degree of uniformity only in conduct. Check that. And prefers to reduce to a minimum the ideological postulates to which assent is demanded of the believer. I'm just going to pause and say that again, because students of mine often want to know what they have to think about certain things. And here is the Orthodox leader of the second half of the 20th century saying that we might say you have to not eat a cheeseburger, maybe, but at the very least, we make very minimal requirements about ideological postulates to which assent is demanded. The emphasis is on halacha, not on thought. Even more fortunately, we have Maimonides, who is probably the greatest Jewish philosopher of all time, who takes a position diametrically opposed to Saja's theory, which is why I'm not a Maimonidean. 2 centuries after Saja, he proposed a philosophy of man, which was not based on man's superiority to all creation, but rather on the human being's insignificance in the universe. Now, in his use, Maimonides accepted the old Sajanic anthropocentrism. In fact, in his commentary on the Mishnah, he asserts that man is the purpose of all else. However, in his mature years, Maimonides abandoned his early espousal of man's central importance in the universe. Like Saja, Maimonides agreed that the geometric position has value consequences, but unlike Saja, he doesn't believe in the centrality of the middle. Really, I find that so surprising for an Aristotelian. On the contrary, the middle position from him is the low point, the bottom, the area of least value. All right, so this is fascinating theologically to think about. It's a fight over what's most important, the margins or the middle. Are the extremes the heart of it, or does the heart sit at the middle? It's an interesting question. Now, what Saja was influenced by Plato in asserting the superiority of the middle, Maimonides followed Aristotle in maintaining the inferiority of the middle. The most important and precious part of the world, Aristotle holds, is not the core, but the periphery. So let's just pause on Aristotle for a moment. What's the most important part of our shul? Is it the core of the people who come and study and pray every day? Or is it the periphery of the people who we see every once in a while? What's the most important part of anything? Is it the core or the periphery? Anyone want to tell me their own sort of philosophical perspective on that? Anyone ever considered that before?
Didn't you say the core, the core is not the middle part. The middle part is in between the core and the periphery. The core is the inner part.
Let me go back to this. The most important and precious part of the world, Aristotle holds, is not the core, but the limit or the periphery. That's Aristotle. Saja says the most important thing is in the middle. Now, let's go on here. In keeping with the geocentric astronomy of those times, the Earth and its inhabitants are quite the opposite. Okay, blah, 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 blah. For the medieval mind, of the influence of Aristotle, the Earth as the center of the world was not a position of honor. On the contrary, as Professor Lovejoy put it, it was the place farthest removed from the empyrean, the bottom of creation, to which its dregs and baser elements sank. The actual center indeed was hell. All right. So there are 2 fundamental casts of mind, 2 a priori orientations, each opposed to each other. And Lamb is going to call them centripetal, which means tending towards the center, with its roots in Plato, tacitly accepted in much of Jewish literature, and openly espoused by Saja in validating his anthropocentric notions. The other could be called centrifugal value structure, propounded by Aristotle and accepted by Maimonides. Working on the Ptolemaic conception of the geocentric universe, the centripetal approach leads one to consider man as the goal of creation, while the centrifugal bias leads one to assert the inferiority of Earthman to whatever beings exist elsewhere, their worth increasing as one moves from the center outwards. Everyone follow that? Everyone catch that? That's a little philosophical. It's a little philosophical. That is sort of a little heady, but basically it requires a knowledge of geometry, which I happen to have the least of all of you. But if you have a circle, and in the center of a circle, in the center of the ball, what's going to be the most significant area of the ball? Is it going to be the center of the ball, or is it going to be the margins of the ball? What is going to be the most important part? There seems to be a disagreement based upon that. And so pronounced are Maimonides' anti-anthropocentric views that one modern commentator on the guide believes that Maimonides considers anthropocentrism as one of the three fundamental errors that prevent man from arriving at true conceptions. The idea that we think that we're the center of the universe is one of the three main issues that prevent us from understanding the world. Things exist not for the sake of other things, but they exist for their own sake. All right, so man's significance does not depend on his superiority or his uniqueness. All right, so we have these two distinctions between Maimonides and Saadia Gaon. All right, let me see, hold on. All right. I've got 13 minutes left, and how many more pages do I have to get through? Because I want to get to. All right, so what did we do in the medieval Jewish philosophers? Reject man's centrality in the universe. Okay, basically what Lamb wants to assert is man's non-singularity does not imply his insignificance. Okay, so just because we're not alone in the universe doesn't make us any less significant. And he says one may accept, for instance, Saadia's anthropocentrism or Maimonides' opposing view, but modern man need not accept the medieval methodology, which assigned values either high or low to structural positions. So all that stuff we just wasted our time about, modern man doesn't have to worry about that any longer. It matters little whether the globe stands at dead center of the middle of the Milky Way. He says all of that stuff is an old way of looking at things. Similarly, the claim by a race to spiritual dignity and intrinsic metaphysical value does not depend upon a good cosmic address. It depends only upon the ability of the members of that race to enter into a dialogue with the creator of all races. All right, so basically what he's saying is you can accept either that we're at the center of the universe or we're at the margins of the universe, but either way, God spoke to us. It doesn't matter where we're located. It doesn't matter where our cosmic address is, at the middle, at the bottom, at the top, wherever it might be. What matters is that we human beings were created in the divine image and then have the capacity to hear the divine call. Don.
I was thinking maybe we're everywhere. This concept that we have to be in the center or on the periphery, that we are as Adam, as the first that is created, our true nature is the whole of it, where we put ourselves as through our minds, and we say, well, we're in the center, we're in the periphery, we play out that game for whatever reason. But I think the truth is that we're everything. It is one, but not the one of the mind. Not we can't think that. If you think I'm one, that doesn't do it. The oneness is an experience.
But that makes us unique, right? So you're with Saadia.
Well, unique. Everything is unique. I mean, in that concept, everything. There's just one. Unless we want to say God is unique or God is not unique. There's just one. It's all unique in that way.
Yeah,
and
let me go on. Yeah,
and it's together, and it's together.
Yeah, so Lamb goes on and says here, the category of uniqueness, in the theological sense, we have been intending as such a quality. It certainly has a biological and psychological basis, but the fact that one may analogize between mankind and animals or computers or extraterrestrial races does not deny it. Humanity's uniqueness, its divine image, is a measure of spiritual competence and ability which depends upon certain intellectual attainments. All who have attained this degree of intellect and volition and the kind of combination that makes them think of God and yearn for God are members of the community of the spiritually unique, no matter where they may be, right? That's kind of what you were saying, Don. Do you agree with that? Is that right? Or you're saying we're everywhere?
Yes. More like that.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead, Ellen. Go ahead, Ellen.
I just have this thought as we consider these topics, that perhaps our definition or cognition of man is just limited, that beings that, if God created the entire universe, couldn't it be that men inhabit all of these other places as well as here?
I mean, sure. I mean, there's no way for us to be able to prove or disprove that. But we're here, Maimonides, though, Ellen, man may not be the purpose of the universe, yet he may have a purpose in the universe. So every species in creation, man, not man, wherever it might be, has as its imminent purpose the will of God. So the mechanistic origin and the teleological end are identical. All existence comes from God and exists for God. Mankind, like every other kind, fulfills the will of God by its existence, and whatever detracts from man's existence frustrates the purpose and will of the Creator. So what he wants to say is, for the believing Jew, we can accept a far humbler place in the universe than previously assigned to us without surrendering our intrinsic worth. Okay, so now we have the uniqueness of the Creator. What about God? If the universe is so big, I thought God is the only God. I thought God is one. If we have all of the uniqueness of the universe, how do we make sense of that? So whereas the former brings into question the uniqueness of man, the second challenges the uniqueness of God. If man can create life, does it not the concept of creating divinity becomes superfluous? All right, so there is no fundamental of the Jewish faith that, for its own dogmatic integrity, requires or implies the belief that God is the exclusive creator of life. So even if we figure out, there's nothing that say that, we're being creative in our process of being creative and bringing things into life, into children, art, whatever it is, into existence. We are being like God. There's nothing that says that only God can create. Don.
Yeah. So we say God created man. That's where I get funny. I look at it more, God, that man is an expression of God. There is no creation. If there's a creation, we're now separate. And that now comes the problem. And maybe we are the expression of God. Not that we are God. I don't mean it in that way, like some people say, but we are an expression of God. Therefore, we're pretty high, but we're pretty high as an expression of God.
Okay, so here's where we're going to run into problems. Let me zoom ahead a little bit so we can get to some of the problems. God is Rofeh Cholim. God heals the sick. When human beings make medical progress, it fulfills its divinely decreed mission. It does not compete with the Lord. If therefore man will discover the secrets whereby living matter is produced from inanimate stuff, he will not be challenging God, but quite the contrary, fulfilling in unparalleled manner his function of imitatio Dei, the imitation of God, in the assertion and exercises of his creative genius. The mentality that sees in every new advance of science and technology a further challenge to God and to the belief in God is just remarkably anthropomorphic, as if God were an aloof, autocratic, tyrannical deity jealously guarding God's own domain. All right, so we have this contrast now, but listen, what we want to get to, which we only have 5 minutes left for, but let's just talk about this because this is really the heart of it in the last 5 minutes. Probably the major result of the abandonment of man's exclusiveness and the tendency to devaluate humanity as such will be the continuing effort to strip God of the attribute of personality. So follow me with it. If the universe is so much more vast and complex than we heretofore imagined, if man is much less singular, no longer unique, perhaps suppressed in wisdom by other extraterrestrial species, then perhaps God is so great, so remote that God is unconcerned with us, earth creatures. The vast majesty of God's universe threatens such fundamentals as God's providence, his personality, his relatedness to us. To imagine that God has personality, like a mere mortal earthman, that God is concerned with our trivial interests, that God has anything to do with us, is considered an embarrassment, an offense to our modesty, isn't it? I mean, that's right. The threat is not so much intellectual and theological as emotional and psychological. But what begins as the latter often ends up in the former. Now, whether or not God possesses personality, whether or not God does or relate meaningful to man, is a religious question of the most fundamental significance. And so what he says here is that the dimensions of divine personality can be identified by using two philosophical terms, immanence and transcendence. Judaism, for the integrity of its understanding of God, Don, refuses to relinquish either immanence or transcendence. God's withinness in the world and his beyondness from it are both affirmed. To separate them is to deal a fatal blow to all theistic faith. Immanence alone, if we just have immanence, right? These are just two sides of the coin. You know people like this who only love the immanent God, and then you know people who only love the philosophical, distant deist God. You guys know those people. You know both of them. But if you only have immanence alone, results in pantheism, while transcendence alone leads to a complete deism. The first totally identifies God with the world, and the second divorces them without any hope of contact or relationship. You can emphasize transcendence and the related ideas, justice and universalism, or immanence with its related concept of mercy and revelation. But one may not disrupt the equilibrium by denying any one facet, for then one has excommunicated God and reduced God to a cosmic irrelevancy. One then has a deity about whom the philosophers may debate and meditate, but not a God to whom believing people may relate and whom they can worship. So he gives these two words in Judaism that we have for immanence and transcendence. They are kedusha and kavod. All right. So holiness, kedusha, implies the beyondness of God and his supra-mundane existence, while the glory of God refers to God's glory in this world, his quest for man and man's responsiveness to him. We say that God is both holy and glorious. So back in Isaiah, what do we say in Isaiah? You certainly know this. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tsevaot, Melo, Kol HaKa'aretz, Kivodo, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole world is full of his glory. And so that is a combination of both. God is utterly transcendent, beyond human capacity to understand, totally awe, beyond. And God is totally with us at every step of the day, from when we tie our shoelaces to brushing our teeth. God cares intimately about us and is with us. And you really have to hold both together to have the picture of the Jewish God. And so therefore, what Lamb is going to say is that extraterrestrials are not extraterrestrials. What's important is that we can hold both of these elements. And that is the essential element of the Jewish God. You can't turn it into an idol, because then you have made it too immanent. And you can't make it some abstraction, because then it's just, frankly, too far away. All right, thoughts? We didn't get through all of it, but it's 1 o'clock. Yeah, Don.
Well, I just think, as you said, that this is tough stuff.
Well, that's why you guys are here, right? I expect that from this group. That's all right. Yeah.
I mean, to get the experience, what you spoke, I want the experience of that. And that is like, my mind's going like both sides so fast right now. Which one is it? Which one is it? So thank you.
No, that's, I think, basically Jewish ritual done right captures that. And it's something that you don't understand intellectually. It's just something that you experience. And so I've devoted the last 20 years to try to create those moments, those ineffable experiences where we can hold those two together and have it feel right, I guess. Lisa.
This brings many things to mind, but I will be what I will be. Yeh asher yeh.
Beautiful.
That's our project. That's what we can do.
And I agree. I mean, I agree. And that is freedom. So that what Lisa just quoted, the name of God, I will be what I will be, that could be translated in past tense, present tense, or future tense. It can either mean I was what I was, I am what I am, or I will be what I will be. And so what does that mean? That means that whatever we think God is today, God reserves the right to be something totally different tomorrow. That is God's free will. So don't make any structure too firm and bow down to it, because you know what? God's going to do whatever God's going to do tomorrow. And because God's going to do whatever God does tomorrow, we're also given that freedom. That's where our freedom comes from, because we were created in the divine image. Good. I see I've blown Don's mind there. That's good. Let me end with that. Next week, we are going to be beginning the Elul study with Rabbi Lou. If you know people who are interested in learning more about Rabbi Lou, invite them to join us for that. And fun to talk about ETs with you for a bit. Take care, everybody.